The doctors said he had 3 days left. But before the machines could drown out his voice, the 10-year-old boy asked for a pen and whispered with what little strength he had, "Please, give this to him. He needs to know." No one in that hospital room was ready for who him was. There are children in this world who are born carrying something heavy, not in their hands, not in their bags, but somewhere deeper, in the chest, behind the ribs, where something small and fragile beats a little too hard, a little too uncertain, like a candle flame in a room with no walls. Ethan Cole was one of those children. He was 9 years old, and he lived in a one-room apartment above a closed-down bakery on the east side of the city. The smell of old bread still seeped through the floorboards some mornings, sweet and quiet and distant, and his mother said it was the building remembering better days. Ethan liked that idea. He liked the idea that things could remember. He was small for his age, not just thin, but careful, the kind of boy who folded his hospital blanket neatly even when the pain bent his body in half. Who said thank you to nurses at 2 in the morning when they woke him for blood draws? Who kept his drawings organized in a folder by date because he believed that order made things feel less out of control? And Ethan's life had a way of feeling very out of control. 2 years earlier, the doctors had given his condition a long name, a rare heart defect, the kind that insurance companies listed in fine print under limited coverage, the kind that turned ordinary childhood activities like running, laughing too hard, or climbing stairs into negotiations with his own body. His mother, Maria, had sold almost everything they owned to pay for his first round of treatments, her jewelry, her laptop, a second-hand car she had spent 3 years paying off. She worked double shifts at a grocery store, days and some nights, and came home smelling of produce and exhaustion. She never complained in front of Ethan, but sometimes when she thought he was asleep, he could hear her through the thin walls, the quiet sound of someone trying very hard not to fall apart to pass the time. Ethan drew pictures, tall buildings with mirrored glass, helicopters landing on rooftops, men in suits stepping out of cars while assistants held umbrellas, cities he had only ever seen in photographs, with skies that were always clear in his drawings, even when the real sky outside his window was gray and heavy with rain. He told his mother he wanted to work in a building like that someday, and she asked him once, pointing at one of his sketches, which one? "The tallest one," he said. "The one where you can see the whole city." She smiled at that. Then she quietly walked into the bathroom, and Ethan pretended not to hear what came after. Across the city, in the tallest building with mirrored windows, the one that reflected clouds and made the sky look like it was on fire at sunset, Daniel Hart adjusted his cufflinks. He did this every morning without thinking, a ritual as automatic as breathing. Cufflinks first, then the jacket, then the expression, that carefully assembled look of calm authority that journalist had described as commanding and visionary in once. In a profile he had framed on his office wall, the face of modern ambition, Daniel was 42 years old, CEO of Hart Global Technologies, a company he had built from a 2-person startup in a rented garage into a billion-dollar enterprise, with offices on 4 continents. The headlines loved him. The boardroom feared him. His calendar had no blank spaces. He was efficient, calculated, and entirely unwilling to waste time on sentiment, having learned early in his career that emotion was a liability in business, that the men who let themselves feel too much were the men who flinched at the wrong moment, who hesitated, who lost. He had not built what he built by flinching. He had an assistant named Jordan who pre-filtered all his correspondence, sorting personal letters into a separate folder that Daniel rarely opened. Personal letters were complications, distractions, things that belonged to a version of himself that no longer existed. He told himself this often enough that he had almost started to believe it. He had grown up with very little, a small apartment not unlike Ethan's, though in a different city, with a mother who worked 2 jobs and a father who was never there. He had decided young that he would become the kind of man who was always present, not for people necessarily, but for opportunities, for the moment, for the next step forward. He had been very good at the next step. He had been considerably less good at looking back. Back in the one-room apartment above the old bakery, autumn had turned cold early. Ethan's condition had worsened, not slowly. The way things sometimes worsen gradually and give you time to adjust, but quickly, cruelly. The way a storm arrives without warning and rearranges everything you thought was stable. The doctors were honest this time. They sat across from Maria in a room with beige walls and fluorescent lights, used the phrase palliative care, and mentioned a number. 3 days. Possibly less. Possibly more, if they were lucky, but the word lucky felt obscene in that room, in that light. And Maria didn't say anything for a very long time. Ethan knew something had shifted. He was 9, not naive. That evening he asked his mother for a pen. His voice soft and calm in the way that frightened her most, because he had always been this way. Steady in the places where most people panic. "I need to write something," he said. She asked him to whom, and he was quiet for a moment, his eyes moving to the window where the city lights were blinking on one by one as the sky darkened. "To Mr. Daniel Hart," he said. The name had not been spoken in years. Maria had tried very hard to make sure of that, but children are perceptive in ways adults forget. And a year earlier, Ethan had found an old photograph tucked inside a book she hadn't opened in a decade. A younger version of herself, laughing and light, standing beside a young man at a college event. She had tried to brush it off, calling him an old friend, but Ethan had looked at her carefully and asked if he was his dad. She had answered only some of his questions. He had stored the rest out now. With trembling fingers and a handwriting made uneven by illness and effort, he wrote, "Mr. Hart, I don't know if you remember my mom. I know you're busy. I know important people don't always have time for small ones. But I wanted to say that I'm not angry. I just wanted to meet you once, because I think you're my dad, and I wanted you to know I don't blame you." When he finished, he folded it carefully. 3 folds, precise as always. "Promise you'll send it," he whispered. Maria couldn't find her voice. She pressed her lips together, her hands shaking, and nodded. He reached out and held her hand, that tiny, thin-wristed hand, and said, quietly, "It's okay, Mom. I just wanted him to know." The letter arrived at Hart Global's headquarters 2 days later. Jordan flagged it as personal and placed it in the folder Daniel almost never opened. But that morning, for reasons he could not explain, and would later say felt like something pulling at him, he opened it. There were 7 letters inside, 6 from former employees, former business partners, former acquaintances riding the coattails of his success. The 7th was different. The envelope was small, the handwriting on the outside uneven and fragile, like someone had written it with great effort and greater care. His name was spelled correctly, but the letters leaned in different directions, as though the hand holding the pen had been tired. He opened it. He read the first line casually. By the 3rd line, his hand had stopped moving. By the word dad, a word he had never applied to himself, had never allowed himself to apply to himself. The room felt smaller, the air felt different, and something in his chest, behind his ribs, shifted in a way he didn't have language for. Memories he had sealed away carefully, deliberately, the way you seal a room you don't want to enter, began to surface. Her name was Maria Cole. They had been inseparable in college. She had believed in him before investors did, before the world did, reading his business plans at midnight and telling him in a tone that made him believe it himself, that they could actually work. She had laughed at things nobody else found funny. She had made the city feel smaller and warmer and more manageable. He had loved her. He had simply been young enough to not yet understand what that meant. When the overseas opportunity came, the offer that would become the foundation of Hart Global, he had been terrified not of failure, but of being held back, of choosing one life and losing another. She had told him she was pregnant the same week the offer arrived. He panicked. He told himself things that he wasn't ready, that a child needed stability and not a man chasing a dream across the ocean, that success was itself a form of love, and that if he built something great, he could come back for them properly, fully, as someone worthy. He told himself he would come back. He sent money once, just once, and then he changed his number, changed his city, changed his life. In the process of building everything, he had buried the one thing he had never faced. He had never confirmed what happened to her, or to the baby. He looked at the date at the bottom of the letter. 2 days ago. He called the hospital, gave them the name, and waited. There was a pause on the other end, the kind of pause that contained something terrible inside it. And then the voice said, "Ethan Cole passed away this morning." Daniel did not schedule it. He did not prepare remarks, did not call his PR team, did not text Jordan to block the afternoon. He just went. He left his office without telling anyone where he was going, took the elevator alone, and sat in the back of his car staring out the window at a city he had built his life inside. A city that now felt strangely hollow. The funeral was small, the way small funerals are, not small in meaning, but in attendance. Folding chairs on wet grass under a gray sky. A white casket that was too small. Impossibly small for the weight of everything it represented. A handful of neighbors, 2 nurses who had cared for Ethan, and a teacher from his school who had driven 40 minutes in the rain. When Daniel stepped out of his car, people stared. They recognized him, of course they did. His face was on magazine covers and conference banners and the sides of buildings. But he ignored the stares entirely. Maria recognized him too. She was standing near the casket, her coat too thin for the weather, her eyes carrying something beyond grief. A specific exhaustion that comes from loving someone with everything you have. and knowing it was never quite enough. For a moment she looked like she might turn away. She didn't. He walked toward her slowly, not as a CEO, not as a billionaire, not as the man on the magazine covers, but as a man who had just learned the exact cost of his ambition. "I didn't know," he said, his voice breaking on the last word, making no attempt to hold it together. "I should have known. I should have been there. I should have." She stopped him gently. "I know," she said. 2 words. Not forgiveness, not condemnation, just acknowledgement. The truth spoken quietly into the rain. She handed him something, a sketchbook, small, its cover bent at one corner, its pages soft from handling. He opened it and found page after page of tall glass buildings. Cities Ethan had never visited, skies he had never flown through. Rooftops with helicopters and men in suits stepping out of cars, a boy's imagination. Boundless and generous, building a world that had not yet made room for him. He turned to the final page slowly, to stick figures standing on a rooftop, one small and one tall, with a sky full of careful crayon blue lines between them. And underneath, in the most careful handwriting on any page in the book, for words, "Me and Dad." Daniel Hart, who had not cried in the presence of another person in over 20 years, dropped to his knees on the wet grass in front of a casket too small for the world's cruelty. Not because cameras were there, not because it was strategic, not because someone was watching, but because for the first time in decades he was feeling something he couldn't control, couldn't delegate, couldn't schedule away. Regret and love, the 2 most devastating things that can arrive in the same moment, and the knowledge, sharp and irreversible, that they had arrived too late. 3 months later, Hart Global held a press conference. Journalists expected a product announcement, a merger, a new market expansion, something with numbers attached, something they could file under business news and move on from. They got something different. Daniel walked to the podium without notes, stood there for a moment in complete silence, and the room went quiet in the way rooms go quiet when they sense something real is about to happen. 3 months ago, he began. "I received a letter." And then he told them everything. Not a curated version, not a PR-approved narrative, but everything. The college years, the choice he made, the money he sent once, and the silence that followed. The letter from a 9-year-old boy who had 3 days left and chose to spend some of them writing to a man he had never met. "He didn't ask me for anything," Daniel said. "He just wanted me to know he didn't blame me." He announced the Ethan Cole Foundation, endowed with $50 million from his personal holdings, and structured to fund heart treatments for children from families who could not afford them. Every child approved for support would receive full coverage, not insurance coverage, not partial coverage, but complete care, top to bottom for as long as it was needed. But that wasn't the part that surprised the room most. "I will personally visit every child we support," he said. "Not to take photographs, not for press releases. I will go and sit with them and ask them what they dream about." He paused. "Because someone once dreamed about me, and I didn't show up in time to hear it." He kept his word. Over the next year, Daniel visited 43 children across 6 cities, sitting in hospital rooms not unlike the one Ethan had occupied, listening to dreams about being astronauts, architects, football players, veterinarians, and video game designers. He asked follow-up questions, brought sketchbooks as gifts, and stayed longer than his schedule ever allowed. His assistant Jordan began blocking for days per month just for the visits. At first, people assumed it was image management, a billionaire's carefully choreographed act of public redemption. Then they watched him sit cross-legged on the floor of a hospital room, in his $5,000 suit, studying a child's drawing of a spaceship, and asked with complete and unperformed sincerity, "How fast does it go?" And they understood that something had actually changed a year after the funeral. At Hart Global's annual shareholders meeting, an event historically open with quarterly projections and revenue charts, Daniel took the stage and did something unexpected. He talked about Ethan first. "I want to tell you about my son," he said, and the room, full of investors and analysts and board members, went very still. He was 9 years old. He had a rare heart condition. He had 3 days to live when he wrote me a letter. He had never met me. He had no reason to be kind to me. Daniel looked out at all those faces, all those careful and calculating people, and he let them see his own face without that performance. He drew pictures of buildings like this one, he said. He wanted to work somewhere like this someday. He drew himself standing on a rooftop with his father. He paused before continuing. "I used to believe that success required a certain kind of ruthlessness, that to build something great, you had to be willing to leave certain things behind. I was wrong." He looked down at the podium for a moment, steadying himself. "My son taught me something in a letter he wrote with trembling hands in a hospital bed. He taught me that the measure of a life is not what you accumulate, it's who you show up for." Success without responsibility is not success. It's just a very expensive form of running away. If you build something big, build it with your whole self. Make sure your heart grows with it. Because the day will come when the buildings and the numbers and the headlines don't matter. And on that day, what will matter is whether you were present for the people who needed you. The room was silent for a long time after that. Then someone began to clap. Then more. Then all of them. Not because he had given them a return on investment or announced a new product, but because he had stood in front of them and told the truth about something that mattered. Late at night, when the Hart Global offices have emptied out, and the city lights are reflected in the mirrored windows, Daniel sometimes sits alone at his desk, not working, just sitting. In the top right drawer, the one he never locks, there is a letter. 3 folds, the handwriting uneven and fragile, leaning slightly to the right. His name spelled correctly on the envelope in the careful cursive of a boy who believed that words, sent in the right direction, could reach the people who needed to hear them. He does not keep it there as punishment. He keeps it there as a reminder that a 9-year-old boy, with 3 days left in a body that had already begun to let him down, chose to use some of his remaining time to tell a stranger that he was not angry. That forgiveness, when it comes from someone who had every right to withhold it, is not a small thing. That love, the real kind, the kind that asks nothing in return, can travel across a city in an envelope and arrive in the middle of a life that had forgotten how to feel it. Ethan Cole never got to work in a tall building. He never got to stand on a rooftop and see the whole city. He never got the meeting he asked for. But his father, the man he never blamed, the man he only ever wanted once, is now different because of him. More present, more human, more honest. Every child whose treatment the foundation covers is alive, in part, because of a boy who used his last days not in anger, not in grief, but in grace. Every dream those children carry, of rooftops and rockets and buildings with mirrored glass, is, in some quiet way, an echo of his. The boy who folded his hospital blanket neatly even when the pain bent his body in half. The boy who drew cities he had never seen. The boy who said, "I don't blame you,"